Hello.
Hey, Sahar, how are you?
Good. How are you? Good
Good.
afternoon, morning. I don't know.
Yeah, it's
Something
uh
like
it's
that.
still morning over here.
Yeah.
Ramadan Mubarak to you.
Thank you. Thank
How's it
you.
going?
It's going well. Still kind of, I think, in the adjustment period a little bit. It's been about a week now. Um, I think I was just thinking this morning, okay, we've got 3 more weeks. Like this is the time where I think I think, the first few days in the week is just all really exciting as you're getting into the like excitement of Ramadan and you still
Yeah.
have some leftover energy from before Ramadan. And now we're getting into sort of the plateau, which is also another, interesting and fun time to be in.
Yeah, but isn't it, I mean, at least with my experience with students and other people I've
Yeah.
known who observe Ramadan, it's like the community sort of brings you through those peaks and
Yeah.
valleys. So how does that even happen right now? In the like there's still community, of course. Like
Yeah.
we're live right now with how many people, but
Right.
but it's different, right?
It is very different. I think, especially for me growing up, Ramadan was such a communal and family event.
Yeah,
Um, my grandparents growing up were very involved in the mosque and still are, and so that carried through with my parents and my siblings and myself. So we were attending events or going to family friends' houses all the time, growing up. But I've sort of had an adjustment over the past 5, 6 years as I've, been moving around the country and like having my own, like starting my own life a little bit of really navigating what it means to sort of do Ramadan on my own away from that community and what does new community look like.
sure.
This is still very different.
Right.
Um, a lot of it is, yeah, still checking in with friends and family, and there are so many live events that are happening right now. It's
Hmm.
somewhat overwhelming at times, I mean, it's also really cool because I actually am getting to connect with, some of my home community that I normally wouldn't get to connect with. Um, but there's like a lot of communities are like, we have a 5 minute reflection, we have like a 10 minute Quran recitation, we have an hour long like daily this, daily that. Um, it's a lot. So I mean, I think it offers a menu for people to choose what's meaningful for them. But I think it
Yeah,
really is re-emphasizing sort of the inward nature of Ramadan and some of those like more personal spiritual practices.
sure, sure. Well, I definitely want to talk with you more about that and
Yeah,
how, like, especially the students that you're interacting with, how
yeah,
they're navigating this time. But before we get too far into that, you're in
yeah.
Chicago,
I
right? Right
am.
now? Yeah. So can you tell, and you're on our research advisory board at Springtide, which we're so grateful for.
Thank you.
Excited for the ways that your comments and thoughts have already helped, like, started shaping our research in the future, and looking forward to that to come. But maybe give people a sense of what you do at the University of Chicago and
Yeah.
describe your role.
Thank you. Yeah, so I am the Assistant Director of Spiritual Life and the Advisor for Muslim Affairs at the University of Chicago, which loves really long titles. Um,
It's the
um,
University of Chicago.
yeah. Side note, I was once introduced at a conference as the Assistant Dictator of Spiritual Life, and I was like, it is a shorter title. um, but so there, I work alongside my colleague, the director of spiritual life and the assistant dean, along with our team of 4 student program assistants. And we run our spiritual life office, which is the sort of umbrella host office that supports all of our religious and spiritual communities on campus. And we have about 60 to 80 per year that we're supporting. And that ranges from
60 to 80 different
different,
groups?
yes,
That's amazing. That's so
yeah.
cool.
So finally, about a year and a half ago, we finally put our interest form online, and it wasn't a paper form that people checked off because that was hard to input. Um,
Yeah.
but so this ranges from groups that are 2 to 3 people who are like who want to just find a common space to come together and are just wanting a way to connect with one another, to groups that are 2 to 300 students large who are also registered student organizations through the campus and student life,
Hmm.
I'm sorry, student leadership office. And only about 20 of our organizations are sort of, if you will, official, or not official, but like our registered student organizations. Most of the people we work with are, communities that just want a space to gather. And
Yeah.
so under our office, we're able to give them the space and some of that support and be able to help, communities grow.
So that's really great and fascinating work. I see a lot of people, some people logging in and checking
Mm-hmm.
us out. Feel free to leave comments. There's a question mark as well, boxing, and we'll try and I'll keep track of those, and we'll get to some of those questions later. But I want, I've seen a lot of faith communities, because Springtide puts us in maybe not with 60 to 80, but Springtide puts us in contact with a lot of different groups around the
Mm-hmm.
country. They're all adjusting.
Mm-hmm.
Christians just finished Lent, and
Right.
had these like this big sort of national conversation about what do we do for Easter, which
Right.
is such a
Right.
a communal event for Christians. What sort of things do you see your students doing? Either around Ramadan or other things, as they try and navigate how they're like doing faith and spiritual practice now that we've
Yeah.
done like this social isolation and distancing thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. So our I'll sort of start with in non-quarantine times, our community often are so I've been with Chicago for this is now my second year. So last year was my first Ramadan with them, and they were offering communal iftars and breaking of the fast every night
Mm,
for all 30 days, and it was a community of not just students, but of faculty and staff and other local neighborhood community members, and it was the students who really wanted this. And as an advisor to the groups that were organizing this, I said, you guys are also students. You're also going through finals. It's okay if you can't do it every day. They're like, no, we have to. We have to.
yeah.
So it's really about that's something that nourishes them during this time, and uh, so I think it really was a big shift for them to have to say, we can't do this year, even in smaller amounts. It's just not the reality that we have. Um, but they are still keeping up some of the programming that they had planned before. They have one of the members is leading a Quran recitation, where he's just offering that as something that
Mm.
people can join in and participate in as they're comfortable. And they're having their weekly sort of discussion spiritual group online as a way to continue connecting. And I think I would imagine that a number of students who are home with their families are able to connect with their families in different ways, and individually are connecting with one another.
So I think, one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you, Sahar, is like in the research that we did for our first product, or for our first report, Belonging, we really found this like something that I've noticed as a professor, working with college students, and they data to what I've been sensing anecdotally, which is that
Oh,
even though
you're
they're on
breaking up a little bit. Can you
campus,
repeat the question?
oh, sure. Sorry. Even though
Yeah.
college students are on campus, they often feel like really lonely and isolated from one another. And I'm
Hmm.
wondering if you can sort of help us, and people who are watching, to understand like why you think that is, and sort of how that could be even possible on a campus where like you're living and going to class and doing life together.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really great I mean, it's a conversation we have at U Chicago all the time. I think especially at a very high performing, achieving research institution that very
Yeah.
much prides itself on producing all the time.
Right.
Um, Students are often, feeling like they're pulled in so many different directions that, I gotta do, 6 classes, or I don't know how many, but
Right.
plus like 3 different extracurriculars, and I have to lead a couple other groups. And so they're just being pulled in so many different directions. And because of that, are maybe not able to go as deep into their commitments to those, and so are just kind of sort of at that surface level with some of this, just to sort of get the breadth of the whole experience. Um, but I think there is something about like I have to be producing. So there's kind of this culture, we talk about it on our campus, this like culture of a little bit of competition. Or like one of our colleagues said, like the suffering Olympics of like, oh, I've only slept 3 hours. But another one's like, oh, I slept 2.5. And it's not that it's just happening with students. It's happening with
Yeah.
faculty. It's happening with staff. It's just the culture of the university that like you have to be producing something all the time. And I think that silos people into their own little corners of like, if I'm not being the most productive as the person next to me, that I'm not worth, not that they aren't, but like the feeling of like I'm not worth as much,
Yeah.
and so I think that adds to a lot of it, and there's just a lot of comparison of like I'm not doing as much as this person, which feeds into sort of the internal narrative.
And I mean, whether that sense of like loneliness or not good enough is coming because of high competition, like at University of Chicago or from some other source, like, I have thoughts and guesses here, but I think you're the expert. What sort of impact do you see this having on young people's faith and spiritual life at this age?
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting moment to be thinking about that, because when you think about especially undergrads, and so I'm working with both undergrads and graduate students, but I'll focus a little bit more on undergrads right now. Um, they're often between 18 and 22, which is a very formative period of their life. Many of them are for the first time leaving home and having to navigate what all of that means. They're navigating their identities in new ways. They're asking questions about who am I? How do I relate to my family? How do I relate to these belief systems that I grew up with? And oftentimes, as is very natural, there's a lot of rejection of that in the beginning. And what I've seen, especially at U Chicago, because it's a very proudly secular institution, that feeling of like, oh, like questioning and asking religious questions is like pushed to the side. Like other people aren't doing it. So
like maybe it's a hobby at best or something.
Yeah, it's and yeah. Whereas like from my perspective, those are the questions that help you understand the rest of your world. And like, at least that's how I remember being in college too, when I was like, I need to reject all this. But coming out of college and realizing that these can be tools, I think that's sort of some of the work that I get to do, of just like gently pushing back on some of those like narratives, that it doesn't all.
So how do you so I teach, at University of Northern Colorado. So it's a very, it's a state school. So it's not only is it secular, but public. But I teach sociology of religion classes, and, I've got students in my office who are asking what, like, to my ear sound like religious questions, when there's like, I don't know what I should do with my life, which I don't really know how to, for myself, I don't know how to answer that question, like outside of a religious context. And so we end up like having these strange, like walking right up to the line of and I'm trying to maintain this like very neutral presence in the classroom, but they keep pushing me in that, like, I feel that hunger for them to like want that sort of stuff at the same time that they're like, oh, but not like in a church or a mosque, right? Like,
right, exactly.
They don't want anything to do with that, right?
Right, because I think there's also this just general pushback amongst this younger generation of like anything institutional religion. I mean, I think that is still within my generation too, and even other generations, but like it's very strong in like this up and coming generation of like, yeah, I can do religion, spirituality personally, but it has to be personal, and it's not within an institution, which, there's much benefit to that. But I think it's also like, if you've grown up in a system that is very institutionalized, how do you then renegotiate and rename what it is that you believe in, right? And so it really, I mean, I guess I feel that too, of like, I see these things as religious conversations, or conversations about, commitment and vocation and all of that, which are, again, very religious terms, but I'm not going to use those up front. And so it's asking the questions of meaning, or what are the systems that inform your life, and how do you make meaning of this, and why is this important to you, rather than just okay, yeah, tell me about your faith system, because if I ask that, they're going to shut down. Because it's interesting, because when I do have these conversations with students where like I'm going around the question, but like I know what I'm trying to get at, they're often come out of it like, wow, that was like really deep.
These are students who spend all day in an institution that produces like some of the first knowledge in the world in a given topic area, but not sort of like the most
and
basic
just like
questions.
Going inward is seen as like this, oh, why would I do that? Or like you said before, it's a hobby at best. And so when they do take that moment, it's a lot of times I've seen it's felt really refreshing, but I'm also
Yeah.
willing to go there. And sometimes you have to push, and it's also a risk for me to ask some of these questions, right? Like I know that like in some of my training, like some of the hardest work is knowing that whatever questions you're asking is a big risk because it could completely backfire on you, which has happened
Yeah.
before, right? That you could be making complete assumptions that are completely wrong, and then you have to start over.
Then you have to start. So this is what I think, Sahar, this is where I think your experiences are so helpful for the people that we communicate with at Springtide, where, we say often that we live at that intersection between young people's religious and daily lives,
Hmm.
because we recognize that they're sort of exploring, desiring, asking these questions, but not through the normal or the
Hmm.
traditional, rather, connections.
Hmm.
And so their guides are gone. And like the people who would have the official titles in the past that you would turn to now maybe aren't. They're still accessible and they still want to do that work, but young people don't turn to them because they don't
Right.
see them as playing that role. So for those folks who are watching in that space, like you said, like, oh, you got to try, and sometimes it doesn't work. And what have you learned, about work from your experiences on campus that help us to navigate those spaces? I mean, are there like topics that are off limits, or are there ways that you found to be really successful in terms of getting into
Yeah.
these conversations?
I think exemplifying vulnerability is like my favorite way to do it,
Mm.
right? Is just showing it that like, look, I'm here to do this with you. I also try to, for many conversations, I make clear this is not a one-time conversation. Like we're gonna keep talking. Um, most times we don't, but or most times we don't, but
Yeah.
but the idea that like I'm here, this is a long-term thing for me, and this is about a relationship, right? Like I always, one of the really important things about the work that I do is that for me it's very centered in relationship. It's not actually about the conversation, it's about who I'm talking to. Um,
Mm.
I remember there was when I worked at Georgetown University, there was a student who came to me when I had first gotten there. I was living in a first year dorm, and so like we were all very new. I still had boxes everywhere, and they came to me with like a very deep personal concern at like 10 p.m. And like I didn't know that you didn't have to answer your door at 10 p.m. at that point, and so I opened the door, and we talked for 3 hours, and it was just like the student just pouring out their heart of just like
Yeah.
what started off as just like, so I came here to get the answer, let me know what I should do. And I said, I'm not giving you any answers, right? And that also being something I'm very sort of clear and upfront with students about, like, I'm not here to give you answers. You have the answers. I'm here to help you
Mm.
find them and guide the questions that might help you find those answers. But if I give you the answer, it's not going to be meaningful to you.
Yeah.
And most students, just as like that's what my chaplain did in college to me, just as I rejected that too, they do it too. I was like, no, I need the answer. You know what's best for me.
Well, and they have like, especially at that age, and at Springtide we go down. We take our research all the way down to 13-year-olds because there's an extra sort of resource expenditure in a variety of ways to go to that young of an age group. But I think it's so important to begin to understand like where young people start to make that turn, like
Hmm.
because independence isn't, these rites of passage that happen around age 13 for many faith traditions, and just many like cultural and
Hmm.
societal wide things like moving to high school, for example,
Hmm.
happens about that age for many young people. It's not like a light switch though. Like we have
No,
this image, I think, in our head of like, oh, you were a kid or an adolescent or a juvenile or whatever we want to call them, and now you're like, at least like, if you're not full-fledged adult, there's at least been a light switch thrown and now you are this other thing. But
right.
instead it proceeds, like I find that it's like in fits and starts, like.
Absolutely. I think that that's super accurate. Even I think retrospectively, it's like I don't know when I became an adult. Sometimes I still don't feel like an adult. I jokingly said, okay, I think I became adult when I started paying taxes. Like that seems like an
Hmm.
adult thing to do. But yeah, when I think about when I was 13 and then when I moved to high school and then when I moved to college, like all of these different moments, like I actually this morning was thinking about like the move that I made when I first left home to go to grad school, and because I lived at home for college.
Yeah.
And like that was a really big moment for me. That felt like, okay, like now I'm an adult, like I'm doing this big adult thing, like going to
Yeah.
grad school. Um, but then like now I'm like, no, that was not an adult thing to do. Like,
Oh, I don't know. I just like, I think that, I
But
think that's
right,
so.
but like I think just like you said, it's like these like fits and like starts and like
Mhm,
there's no clear answer. There's no like, okay, this happened, you're an adult.
mhm,
But like we have moments in which we're, I think, like invited into being more adult.
mm,
Where you know, like we have more of these interactions or these like experiences that do that for us. But um we're all trying to figure it out. Like that's the big secret. Like none of us have it figured out, which is also something I like to remind a lot of the students and younger folks that I work with. Like none of us have. I mean, like I have some things figured out, but most of it I don't.
well, speak for yourself, Sahar. I've got it all together.
Okay, well let me know. Send me the guide.
um, yeah, and that it's not, I think one of the big, for a variety of reasons, in terms of like, not only like a lot of these are big social reasons that are beyond our
Hmm.
individual control about like the makeup of family systems and what the
Right.
economic situation looks like and the middle class disappearing, et cetera. But like, they don't, it doesn't happen linearly either. Just
No.
because, like, what I found is like, just because a student that I'm working with is in one place today, it doesn't mean that like in 3 months they're going to have made progress along those same lines. Like,
Right.
sometimes it falls back and it all takes me back to what you were saying about like the primary thing that we need to be doing here is pushing into relationships. So if
Hmm.
adulthood doesn't happen and independence isn't happening, at the exact same time and way for most or even a majority of people, it really means that we need to know these young people well so that we
Hmm.
can like sort of diagnose where they are before we
Yeah.
start having questions like, do you believe in God? What does God want for
Right.
your life? Like,
Right.
where do you find meaning? Those kinds of things.
That's exactly, absolutely, which is why I think like my first experience of sort of fully being a chaplain was when I lived in the dorms at Georgetown University, was such an incredible place to do that because I
Yeah.
was living in their life with them. Like I was
Right.
living in the dorm, I was interacting with them, I would go hang out in the common room and like I got to know them, right? And not only did I get to know them, but like the student RA staff I got to know really well. And so we had this relationship. So I mean, again, so my second year of Georgetown, I was also working at Georgetown Hospital. So I was doing both, which was a
Hmm.
wild experience of
Yeah.
like 9 to 5 working in the hospital, seeing everything from, life to death and then going to deal with 18-year-olds. Um,
Who think
but
that sometimes their math exam is life and death.
right, but it was interesting because I would often share stories from the hospital and they would like eat
Yeah.
them up, right? Like they would be like,
Yeah.
whoa, like that's so cool. But it would be the like other thing that allowed them to reflect on their own lives.
Yeah.
Um, but like I remember this one incident where a student was really concerned about a friend who had like gone to the hospital and like it was really late at night and so they weren't necessarily able to go visit the friend at the hospital. Um, and like they wanted me to like fix it. They wanted to go fix the friend.
Mm.
Like they wanted to go be there, which is very caring, very like absolutely you want to be there for a friend. But I was able to sort of in the authority of like I work at both places. I know how both places work.
Yeah.
But also I get where you're coming from. Like I want to take care of my friends too and like I know you and I've been here with you. We share this space together. Was able to have a conversation with the student to be able to really address their own concerns that they
Yeah.
were having.
Yeah. And so that, but you couldn't do that if you weren't like in that
Right. If
relationship.
I,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Right. If I didn't have it, yeah, if I didn't have that baseline, it would be a very different conversation. It would probably come off a lot more dry.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, and maybe you wouldn't have even had the interaction at all,
Right.
probably
Exactly.
is what would
Yeah.
actually happen.
Yeah.
Wh- Um, so like establishing that need for
Hmm.
relationships and this notion that like young people are just not super connected to institutions or trusting of them, uh, something that I think you probably have to deal with and that I don't as a professor have to deal with, but that I think is that you probably do. Like, how then do we create sacred spiritual places for young people given that context of like they may not be inclined to walk into a temple or a synagogue or something like that.
Start with coffee shops.
Start with
Um,
coffee
yeah,
shops.
no, I'm like that. Like again, like whenever sort of in various different institutions, I either need to make sure that our office provides coffee or that I have a budget to go take students out. Like
Hmm.
that's really important because just the simple act of being, hey, like let me get this for you. Like I just want to get to know you and like I want to host you in this way, um, is like a huge step in the door of I want to get to know you as a person more than just like okay, what classes are you in? What grade are you in? What extracurriculars are you leading, right? Um,
Yeah.
and so that's always really important for me is the hospitality part of it.
Oh,
Um,
Olivia just wrote that.
yeah,
Wrote that word hospitality.
she was one of my hospitality like champions at Georgetown.
Mm.
She bakes a lot of really amazing stuff. So I would go join her hospitality hours, and she would come to mine. It was mutually beneficial. But that hospitality is super important because like
Hmm.
that's where you start the conversations. Like that's where I get to say like, hey, tell me about yourself, tell me about your family, tell me about like what excites you or what like concerns you.
Yeah.
um and like that's where you can pick up sort of the threads of like the sacred and the mundane. And you again, I wouldn't probably use those that language,
No, no, no,
but
right.
right,
Yeah.
right, but like, oh, like that, like for you, like doing this art project is really important. Like
Mm.
what are you getting out of it? Like how is that shaping who you are? And again, I think like, so yeah, that's why I think like hospitality and coffee shops are the way to start conversations.
So tell me, okay, Sahar, let's talk about this for a
Yeah,
second because
yeah.
there's nothing magical. I mean, there's caffeine, but like, there's not,
Sugar.
and at least based on what my students drink, a lot of sugar,
Yeah.
in these coffee. But there's nothing like magical in the drink. So help us
It's,
break down like what are
yeah.
the elements there that make that work? Because it seems to me like
Yeah.
at a very minimum, like there's a step about like not being behind a desk. Like I think that
Yeah.
that visual power dynamic is removed. So like I'll offer that as like one step of like
Mm-hmm.
if you weren't going for coffee, I would say like at least find some place where there's not these like traditional trappings of you are this status and I am this status. So like
Mm-hmm.
I'll offer that as one. What are some other
Mm-hmm.
things that you
Yeah,
think
I think,
matter here?
like you said, getting out of the space in which you occupy a certain role. So, like when I'm sitting at my desk, I'm like this chaplain or administrator or whatever that role is,
Yeah.
and like, no, like, look, I want to talk to you as another human. So even if I am being in my office, I have two separate chairs. I sit in those. I don't sit behind my desk.
Right.
And you come out from behind there. Um, I think it's just also adding some of the casual, I mean, the casuality to the whole
Hmm.
conversation. That you know, this is a personal conversation. I'm not here to gather data. I'm here to get to know a person, and really sort of saying like, for so many people, like again, food and drink are ways in which you connect with people. Like just that
Hmm.
basic level of connection. Like we're sharing this experience, as Olivia just said,
Yes.
like ritual. We're sharing
Ritual.
this
Yeah.
experience of like drinking coffee or eating a snack or something. Um, that allows for that. And I think the other kind of like I mentioned with the hospitality thing is just the act of me being able to provide that and provide that care. Because I know that there were many students who I often talk to who were like, well, I can't afford to pay for coffee. And I said, no, 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 this is on me. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna like, and just like there's someone else out there who wants to take care of me in simple ways, but like really meaningful ways.
Yeah. So if we were like sort of building out in an abstract way from
Hmm.
that, if we could reach out to young people in a way that visibly demonstrates our care and concern, removes the sort of traditional power structures, and shares an experience, I think like that all sounds to me like you'd be
Yeah.
winning, right?
Yeah, I think so. Right. I think kind of like you mentioned a little bit before of like younger folks are not going to like traditional religious leaders in the same way, which is I think where like the roles of chaplains are coming in a little bit more that are sort of like and at least within the Muslim community is kind of like this still very ambiguous like
Hmm.
role, and we're still defining that, and I think that it's chaplaincy as a whole is being redefined in so many different ways. Um you know, as the needs are changing. But it's just like one of my favorite sort of definitions of chaplaincy or understandings of chaplaincy are two things. One is that chaplaincy is like the religious work in the secular world.
Mm,
That like that's the role that I get to
love
play. That
that.
I get to like religion doesn't just only happen in a mosque, in a church, in a synagogue, in a temple,
Right.
right? Like it's happening everywhere. I mean, well, that's my personal perspective of that, right? But
Hmm.
I think that's how more of younger people are relating to it. Like it happens in certain places, but it's not
Yes.
just limited to one kind of place. The other definition of chaplaincy I love comes from the author Carrie Egan from the book On Living, I believe, where she talks about chaplains as story holders. That they're the people who can help you hold the stories that shape your life, that give you your meaning. And the chaplain can ask questions, sort of guide that storytelling of your own life,
Yeah.
and help you sort of reach into sort of the tools and the history that you have, to be able to construct, like, when things are really challenging, and like when it is really hard, that the chaplain can be that hold up some of those walls and remind you of like your past and the strengths that you have had
Yeah.
before. So like for me, again, it's relationships and stories, because that's what humans are, right? We're storytellers, we're story hearers. Yeah.
Yeah, and like one of the things that we were super surprised about, or at least surprised me anyway,
Mm-hmm.
about belonging was we kept thinking that young people were going to tell us about how important their friends were in terms
Mm-hmm.
of giving them this sense of belonging, and instead they kept telling us how important trusted adults were. And I think
Mm-hmm.
part of what we heard in those interviews is exactly what you're saying, that there's this, they are the story keepers. Like my
Mm-hmm.
friends, like 13 to 25-year-olds, it's hard enough to figure out yourself, let alone other people. And
Right.
you can't be responsible for holding that story, and
Right.
like those relationships, some of them endure, but a lot of them don't.
Right.
And adults can, in that chaplain way, I think if they're doing the right kind of work, like they can be like, I have known you, since you were struggling with long division,
Right.
like
Yeah.
I've been in your life and seen all of
Right.
this
The
stuff. And
longevity of the
yeah,
relationship. Absolutely.
and
And
that's
I
where
think,
chaplains can do that same work too.
right, exactly. And I think that makes so much sense, because I always also think about chaplaincy is very much, from a professional standpoint, like it's a one-way relationship, in the sense that like I am not friends with my students. I also tell
Right.
this to them. Like, I am not your friend. Like, I will be very friendly with you. I'm here for you. And like on the outward, I might look like we're friends. And like we are, but we're not. Like, it's not the same. Like, I'm not going to go tell you all my problems, right? And
Right.
I think that's part of what makes that space sacred, right? Like
Yeah.
that you get to dump everything into this other person, and they're holding that for you. Like,
Yeah.
I really remember that with my chaplain in college, of just being able to like literally just barge into her office. I don't know what, she was probably doing something important, and just be like, I need to talk to you. My life is falling apart. And she would be there, right? Like, she would do that for me and create that space for me. And like, I didn't have to worry about like what her problems were. I didn't have to worry about like how she was going to react. Like, I knew she was going to be there for me.
Yeah.
Um, and like that kind of relationship and companionship, I think, was just really important at the time. Because that's what you need. Like,
Yeah.
just like as an advocate for people like seeking out therapy, if that's beneficial for them, like you
Hmm.
need a person that's just there for you. Like, you don't have
Yeah.
to worry about their attention being on other people at the moment. Like, when they're talking to you, like they're just there for you.
Yeah, that's really. I want to point out that we'll take questions here if people have questions that they want to drop in
Mm-hmm.
the comments or question mark. But I had I had just like one last sort of question
Mm-hmm.
or comment for you, Sahar, that I wanted to get to, which is we see that power. I mean, I see that power all the time as students, young people being able to turn to trusted adults. That you're right, like they told us this. I don't want more
Mm-hmm.
friends. I have friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I want trusted adults.
Friends are the
Um,
people you get to go be goofy with, the people you get to like make silly videos with, but like the people,
yeah.
like you said before, like your peers are like also going through their own stuff. How are they gonna like deal with your stuff too?
Right. Um, but in the social distance, what
Yeah.
we internally been calling like the social distancing survey, because right at the beginning of stay-at-home orders, we did a quick like flash survey of the country, and we found two things that were startling, and I'm curious
Mm-hmm.
about what you think about this. On the one hand, 50% of the 18 to 25-year-olds that we surveyed, or very close to 50%, had started some new religious practice in the previous
Hmm.
2 weeks.
Oh,
And at the
wow.
same time, which was, yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
And at the same time, like less than 1% of them had been reached out to by a religious leader or a faith leader.
Hmm.
So like here they were trying all this stuff, but like
Mm-hmm.
without any of the experts, that like should sort of guide them along the way.
Yeah.
And I think part of that, and we've got a video series out with other some other Abigail Russert from the Princeton Theological Seminary's
Mm-hmm.
Institute for Youth Ministry and her team about like what exactly to say to young people, because I think part of this is like I don't even know how I would reach out. I hear faith
Mm-hmm.
leaders say that. So in this moment where young people are trying to figure this out and navigate it, and sometimes through faith or religion and spirituality, what advice would you give as, from an office of spiritual life? Like, how
Yeah.
should adults be trying to interact with young people in this time?
I think it really still comes back to the relationship and building that individual like connection with a student. And for me, a lot of that is reminding students that I'm here for, let me know if you want to check in, like happy to schedule a call
Mm,
or a Zoom or something. But then also providing the resources to do this exploration on their own. I
mm,
think kind of connected back to a little bit of our conversation earlier. Um, if like the more traditional like religious leaders were to reach out to a lot of them, I think that they would probably reject them in the same ways that they
oh,
would
sure.
reject like institutional religions, right? Like they want to explore, see, oh, does this fit with me? Like, how do I fit with this kind of a thing? But again, it's still sort of very much on their own terms at this
Hmm.
time. And like, again, with so much change and navigation, like it makes sense that they're looking for this, like something to root them and their sense of meaning and belonging.
Sure.
Um, but again, it's still very individual.
Hmm.
Even if there's might be this yearning for something greater, I also would wonder like if they're how their ability to sort of express that fully. I think that there's some who might not even know that that's a language that they're looking for.
Right.
Um, but that like so for our office, like well, we host a number of very what we hope is very low minimum like bar levels of like
Hmm.
just come in and chat with us kind of thing. And while we may not have a lot of people come through on a certain amount of time, the fact that it's out there, people know that they can come, I think is really powerful. Which
Yeah.
is why like I don't mind hosting my weekly chat, even if no one comes for a certain day or something, right?
Hmm.
But because knowing that like even if there's that one person that comes, like it could be meaningful or people knowing that I'm there.
Right.
Um, and I continue to basically sign off all emails with like, let me know if you want to talk.
Hmm.
Um, um, because it's also the balance of like, am I too pushy? Am I like,
Right.
am I like trying to like, be too much? So again, providing resources. So our office spent like the first 2 weeks of quarantine or stay at home, were our spring break, or
Yeah.
finals and then spring break. So we basically took all of that time and moved all of our operations online. And so it gave us the opportunity to think about what kinds of resources are we offering in person, what in terms of like the community and connection, and how can we provide some of that stuff online. And so got to do some cool research, like sort of just searching the web of like what are things that are other folks are doing out there, and being able to sort of connect people to that on our website.
Hmm.
And really just make that the hub of where people can come, right? To see like, look, we're still doing stuff, we're still in community, we're still supporting all of our communities, all of our religious or many of our religious advisors offer regular office hours, and we have a full calendar of when they're all offering them.
Mm.
We have a calendar for all of our spiritual communities that are still hosting virtual events that want to share those out there. So we want it to be known to our community that stuff is still happening. The other interesting part is like it's been interesting to see that people aren't showing up to a lot of this stuff because I think people are tired of Zoom.
Oh, yeah.
Right? People are actually taking the time to actually be offline, which I think is a really good thing.
Hmm.
Which is again why there was so much focus for us to put a lot of resources that people can access on their own time online. So a lot of our live programs that have talks or reflections or whatnot, we record them and then we have it on our YouTube page, so
Sure.
that folks can access them whenever they want. And so I think sort of that autonomy is really coming into a lot of the work that we're thinking about now, of like, this is the age group that wants to do everything on their own and like is starting to figure out their own sort of role in this world and in their family systems and
Yeah.
friend systems and all of that. And so giving them the tools is, I think, the best way to sort of start that conversation right now.
And then there's this really nice sociological tie in here between what we
Hmm.
call backstage and front stage. Like,
Yeah,
when you're first trying out something, you might not want everybody to see it, right? You want to do
exactly,
this like
exactly.
backstage practice
Yeah,
work.
yeah.
So it's like, oh, maybe maybe I am interested in praying the rosary, but I'm not Catholic. I don't know what the rosary is. So if I can have like an online guide to what it means and what that
Hmm.
spiritual tradition comes from, then like I can practice it before I actually
Right.
get like in front of people and maybe make a
And
fool of myself or decide it's not for
yeah,
me or whatever. I
yeah,
think that's a really important point to have those things
absolutely.
online. There's
Hmm.
one question here.
Hmm.
Sarah asks, what are some ways I can show support to my Muslim neighbors during Ramadan this year? That's a great question, Sarah.
Great question. Thank you. I think wishing your Muslim friends and family Ramadan Mubarak, or Mubarak or Happy Ramadan is one way to just show that, you're thinking about them, and, checking in with them as like the month is progressing, knowing that like there's a lot of change in this month that's already happening. Like your body's going through a lot of change for those who are fasting, and for and just like the ways in which communities are very different because there's so much community ritual that isn't happening in the same ways. I think just checking in with them and offering, I think especially if Muslims who are living alone at this time, like asking if they want to be on a call with someone while they're breaking their fast, because that's also a really important time to be with people.
Right.
I think are some really easy ways that we can support one another.
Well, thank you for that, Sahar. This has been
Yeah.
super fascinating. I mean,
Thank
I
you.
know for me personally, like I'm going to take
Yeah.
that story keeper idea
Yeah.
with me out of this, and I appreciate everybody who tuned in. We'll have the conversation posted to our story, and then I'm going to save it this time, unlike last time when I didn't have the setting right. So we'll have this up and we'll share it with you, Sahar. So if you want to put
Great.
it
Thank
up,
you. Yeah.
if it's useful to put it up on your YouTube page
Yeah.
and
Thank
stuff
you.
like
That would
that.
be
So.
great.
And thanks for all your work as an advisory board member.
Thank
It's
you
been
so much.
super helpful.
It's been really exciting to be a part of it.
All right. Have a great weekend, and thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank you. Bye.